Okay, everybody, I think we'll make a start. I want to formally welcome you on behalf of Brookes University and our 125-year celebration series to the lecture this afternoon, and we're absolutely delighted that we have Catherine here to do one of our keynote lectures. What I'm going to do is just spend a couple of minutes telling you about everything that we've been doing for the 125 years and to tell you about some of the future events. So we started planning all of this about 18 months to 2 years ago, and the planning group has been made up of Radcliffe Guild of Nurses members, our local NHS Trust from Oxford Health and OUH, students, alumni and Brookes staff. So we've had a really great committee, and we've been really grateful to secure sponsorship from Health Education England, Thames Valley, for the lecture series, from the Radcliffe Guild, and also from the Academic Health Science Network. So we're absolutely delighted that we've had so many people supporting this. So what have we been doing? We've had a prestigious lecture series, of which this is one this afternoon. We had a student-organised fun run. Well, I did the walking, but some other people did the running in April, and we raised in excess of £1,000 for local charities for that, and we did a similar event over in Swindon. What we've got coming up is on the 18th of October, we've got the St Fride's Civic Cathedral service. And this is something that occurs every year, and every year there is a different focus for it. We're really privileged this year that the focus for it is going to be nursing. And so the whole event will be focused around nursing, and one of our members of staff who has a music degree has actually written an anthem, and we've put together a student nurse choir, and they'll be singing the anthem, which is just brilliant. And then that choir will then continue and be open to any nurses to join as well. So it'll be a legacy thing from the events. And also on that date, we're starting an exhibition of nursing history in Oxford for a 10-day period. And Peter Zargman is on, and Sue Schutz have been leading that from the Brookes point of view. And I'm delighted to say that we heard today that we've got £7,500 to help with that exhibition from the Lottery Fund. So that was news that we got this morning, which is absolutely brilliant. We're really delighted. So, events that we've got until December from the lecture series. On the 1st of August, we've got Professor Patricia Davidson from Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, and she's looking at women live longer, but at what cost? And her lecture is at 5 o'clock in this lecture theatre. That again is open to anybody, so please do put that in your diaries and come along. 1st of September, we've got Professor Hester Clocker, and she's a very prominent nurse and dean from South Africa, and she again is doing her lecture here, and that'll be at 6 o'clock. 20th of September, we've got Professor Laura Serrant. Her lecture again is here, and that's looking at diversity and leadership and academic identity in nursing. And then 26th of October, we've got Professor Ruth Northway, and her lecture again will be at 6 o'clock at Marsden Road. So do put all of those in your diary. The 20th and the 26th will be bookable through the Brookes website. The 1st of August and the 1st of September are bookable through either emailing me or my PA, but the details will be on the Brookes website. And just today we've been planning our very last event, which will occur in the first week in December, and that will be a big question and answer event with key national nursing leaders from the country, and will be held up at the John Henry Brookes building, and then there will be a big wine reception afterwards, because that will be the last event that we have in the 125-year series. So we've just been starting to plan that, and the Academic Health Science Network are very kindly sponsoring that event, which is great. So lots of things going on, and lots of things to look forward to up until December. So I'd now like the privilege of introducing our guest speaker this evening, Professor Catherine Stoddart. And Catherine is Deputy CEO and Chief Nurse at Oxford University Hospital FoundationTrust. And previously, Catherine was Chief Nurse and Midwifery Officer at Western Australia, in Western Australia. And Catherine is leading the OUFT, their goal of achieving the international recognition as a magnet trust by 2018. And she is passionate about ensuring that Oxford is a city where nurses and midwives can have a real thriving professional career, and I think we would all echo that, particularly with our history of nursing here as well. And Catherine believes it's essential to develop nurses who have contemporary expertise, skills and professionalism in order to deliver excellent care in a world-class environment that supports and influences world-class healthcare. She is both a Nuffield and Churchill Fellow, and she was also the Telstra Western Australia Businesswoman of the Year in 2011. And in 2013 she was awarded the Public Services Medal in recognition of her contribution to global healthcare nursing. And I'm delighted also that she's one of our honorary professors for Oxford Brookes University. So I think you'll agree with me that she is excellently qualified to talk to us about the future of nursing. And thank you very much, Catherine.
Okay, folks, so I'll just get all the technical bits out of the way. Can I just check, who here is a nurse, midwife, allied health professional, works in a hospital? Everyone. Is there anyone from the general public here? Excellent. That means I can tailor my conversation specifically around healthcare. Just double checking. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I guess for me this is a real opportunity to talk about where I see the future of nursing in terms of leadership and how we can actually develop the skills for our nursing, allied health and clinical staff more broadly, and where that sits. I'm incredibly proud to have been a nurse for a long period of time now. I'm not going to tell you how long because it's just depressing. But also that, as I've said before, and some of you will have heard this, I've been a nurse longer than I've been an adult. So it's not what I do, it's who I am. And I think it will be for everyone. Whether you're a doctor, a nurse, an allied health professional, a clinical scientist, it's embedded in your DNA almost by the time you hit our age, some of our ages. Oh, there we go. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about what are the traits of healthcare leaders that we would expect to see. What do nurses as executive leaders and CEOs look like? And what can we think about in the future about how we might do things differently? Some of this is familiar to all of you, and I will be talking a little bit, obviously, about issues that affect the image and the gender of nursing, but they affect how we perceive ourselves, how the public perceives us, and how the organisation perceives us. And I think we've got some challenges, but also we've got some fantastic opportunities out of that. So the personal traits of healthcare leaders, I'm sorry, I should point out, I can't wander around, which I normally do because I'm attached. So I apologise for that. And I realise it's hot, so if you need to fan yourself, go for it. The personal traits of leaders, healthcare leaders in particular, are around areas of high levels of energy, and I'd have to say resilience. Particularly the NHS, all healthcare systems require a lot of resilience, and I think that's a personal trait of healthcare leaders. And when I say that, I mean everyone from a Band 7 sister up to the CEO and those people that work at a national level. As we all know, in the current environment, to work in the national level must be an incredibly exhausting and resilience-affecting environment. Personal integrity I think is fundamental, because you will get found out. There's no doubt about it. At some point in your career, someone will recognise that there's a dissonance between what you say and what you do. Self-confidence is important, and I think that's one area, particularly based on the traditions that we have, that is a struggle for some healthcare professionals, and we have to work really hard on it. Emotional maturity, sometimes taking the quiet ground rather than voicing your opinion at every step of the mark, or making your point. Sometimes you have to step back, and I think that's a developmental area. I also think internal locus of control is incredibly important. And for me, that is an area of development for nursing, particularly as leaders. We often feel like we are done to. we don't have control over our environment, or we can't influence. And I think in senior executive roles, and perhaps as soon as we possibly can, that's something we need to learn to build on and to develop ourselves. We're not necessarily strong on the power motivation, though I think there's every goal in every junior staff nurse, allied health professional, perhaps doctor, to be a consultant, to be the ward leader, to be the charge nurse, to be the sister. There's something in there that we wouldn't mind controlling that environment, our internal control. We are achievement orientated, but perhaps not necessarily in the way that you would think for an executive senior role. And we probably have high needs for affiliation, not low needs for affiliation. So what that means is you can walk away after 5 years, say goodbye to the people that you've worked with and start the next job. Or 3 years, or in the case of most CEOs, a year and a half. But there is something about that level learning to be able to do that, to contain that emotion and to be able to step away because you're required to in the role. And I think that's quite hard for most people who are in a caring or a healthcare profession where you rely so much on a team. Some of the behaviours of successful chief executives, if you were looking at this, if you're aspiring to be a chief executive, is anyone, by the way? I'll put my hand up. But I do think it's really important to think about, if you want to be a leader at that, heading in that general direction, what do you need? You do need to be outcome driven. And I think that's really important. It's very nice to also to be strongly relationship orientated, but in the end you need to deliver. Change orientated and a continuous cycle of that. You can't be a person who is, not where you can be, but success may not come your way. You can't be a person who is happy with the status quo. We need to improve health outcomes all the time. And the other element of this, which is an area that most internally focused, individual patient focused clinicians struggle with, is having external networking. Developing networks that can build your resilience, looking for opportunities, looking at the new innovations. It's very difficult when you're inward facing within your organisation. Just out of interest, when I use the term clinician here, I'm actually using medical, so I'm going to jump between the two, which nothing grates on me more than that, but I'm just going to do it for the moment. It's interesting because clinicians in the USA, they have been looking for a long time around how the influence of clinicians, medical in particular, that they have on healthcare. And there has also been a move at Herman Memorial in Houston to have a chief operating officer who is also a chief medical officer or a chief nurse, to see whether or not the quality outcomes are improved. And they have found that. The interesting thing is, in the most recent study that I saw, of the 100 top hospitals, 40% of them had CEOs who were a doctor, and there was another 20% or so that were nurses. So there's something about a clinician leading healthcare that's really important for health outcomes. But the real issue for most patient-centred clinicians is, does it actually mean that you sell out your patient-centredness? And are you, I hate to use the term going to the dark side, but it's a common language about when you step from a clinician role into a management role. And somehow we've got to reconcile the two, because you do feel like you're giving up that fantastic gratification you get on a day-to-day basis when a patient says thank you or you make a difference to a family. You lose that. You know, on a day-to-day basis, a Band 5 nurse is making a difference in the moment. A Band 6 is planning for the next day, whether or not there's somebody on staff. The sister is probably planning for the next week, and if you're lucky, the matron's planning for the next month. If you get to my kind of level, or you're in the senior divisional nurse roles, you're planning for a year, maybe 3 years. So the gratification for that, you have to wait a long time for the satisfaction. And I think that's really important, because I find that, and I'm talking personally now, I constantly seek that instant gratification that you get when someone says thank you or you make a difference to someone. And reconciling that is also hard. Doctors at a board level are lower in the UK than they are in other countries, interestingly, and nurses actually. But there is demonstrated impact, as I mentioned, that you get better performance around quality indicators in particular, patient satisfaction and morbidity rates. I will note that finances don't come up here, and that is one of the areas that I think both medical and nursing clinicians struggle, and allied health, I should say. Some of the research that came out in 2014 showed a whole range of indicators that nurses make a difference at a board level now. And by board level, I also think you should think executive directors, directors of nursing, divisional nurses for those that are in those roles. They're flexible, they're collaborative, we know clinicians are, have a strong personal value set that aligns with the organisation generally, and as a rule have authentic leadership. What they say is what they do, and then provides good job satisfaction for the people that work for them. That's a fundamental thing, I think, in every leadership, and the core values are strong. The other value is, and this is from some other research, is around being patient-focused, having strong connections and good problem-solving skills. The trouble that we struggle with is we're not necessarily strategic, so we love a crisis. Nothing gets us more excited when there's not enough beds and you have to, or there's an emergency event and we have to respond. And that is fantastic. But at a strategic level, developing the conceptual skills is a really important aspect. By being on a board, however you decide to do this, or to develop your own individual skills, you do get a broader view of the world. You get other people's perspective, and it always requires that delicate balance between the professional accountability that you have and anxiety, I have to say, you have about representing your profession and advocating for it, and the organisational need where you're a member of a unitary board, or you're a member of an executive team, or a divisional executive team, or however you work in a community health team. You have to balance that stewardship for the organisation along with the profession. That's probably the hardest thing to manage, I think. We do know that if clinicians get the balance right, they'll be successful. That issue of operational management, people leadership, and learning to develop strategy. But I love this picture, so I just have to do that. Does anyone know where this picture's from? Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it? Not being in England at the time, I didn't realise how gorgeous everyone looked. By our very nature, we have a large number of people that are adaptive, have a lot of capacity, and we should make wide-reaching changes to the healthcare system. And we do on an individual basis and a team basis. But more broadly, as a leader in the whole system, that perhaps is eluding us to some extent, not totally. So if you didn't know, this is how numerous we are. We have 87.2 per 10,000 in the last OECD report. The average is about 100, so we're a little less. But that is, if I've got my maths right, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, 1 in 100 people are nurses. Everyone knows a nurse. Everyone has been influenced by a nurse. So we should have a stronger both political and social impact than perhaps we have. We should be, although we make an enormous influence at an individual level. So what sits below the surface? Why don't we? I think there's something about our training and history, but I'll talk a little bit about it. There's definitely something about the image and the public perception. But the image and the public perception is also our image and public perception, because we're a member of the public. And so by default, to some extent, we reinforce some of those stereotypes. So we have to be really vigilant about this. I'll use that word a couple of times, I think. We have our own personal value set about getting distance from patients. And when I say this, I'm talking about all clinicians, because although it's specifically about nurses, I do think it affects clinicians more broadly. Gender has to play a role in this. 91% of nurses are female, 9% are men. And as a result of that, I think we are worse off for that. We would do well to have more men in our profession, I think, and I'll explain. There's a hierarchy pyramid. There's one person at the top of the tree in most organisations. You don't see multiple nurses generally on boards for a range of different roles. Even if they stepped out into something else, it's unusual. So if you want to get to the top of the tree, I'll use our organisation as an example. You've got probably 4,000 people out of the 5,000 people fighting for Band 5 roles, rapidly going into a peak where there's one job at the end of it. There's only 4 divisional nurse jobs. There's only probably 17 matron roles. I'm using our organisation as an example. So it's a very sharp incline to try and get there. We're all fighting for the same jobs, thus we move. So we need to think about that. How do we actually get the succession right so that people get an experience slightly higher up in each layer so that they can actually step into them? Or do we create more roles that are broader? I think it's our own behaviour and our own personal style, how we work. So history and hierarchy is a really important thing. I think this is about the 1950s, so I have to say my uniform was pretty close to that, if anybody else remembers this. But we come from a history of being nuns and thus being quite subservient, of army, and you can see the army, and brothels. So we've got a really interesting, well, places of ill repute then possibly would be a nice term. But we come from a history that is about female and is also about places where you wouldn't necessarily, women are not necessarily seen in high regard. The army possibly is the last, the one where there was opportunity, but over time that has changed. You could have mixed views on hats, and if we have time to have a good conversation, I suspect we could have an argument about whether hats and cuffs demonstrate some kind of subservience or not, but I personally think they do. I want to show this one, which I've shown to some of you, because for a reason. Now that person in blue is me. 8 months pregnant, 8.5 months pregnant. That was the day I was leaving work. I'm in my 3rd year of nursing. This is something about the history, besides the hideous photo. And I was just saying, when you realise you've put on 4 stone, it's a little distressing. But the interesting thing is, I've got stripes. So it really reinforces that you don't step above your station in life until you hit the next stripe. You may not even sit down until you get the next stripe. You certainly stood up when doctors came in the room. So to question them was very difficult. The other thing it says, I wasn't allowed a maternity uniform, so that is my mother's attempt at trying to create my dress into a uniform, because there was such a disregard for women having children during... I was married. If I'd been unmarried, I'm sure I would have got kicked out. This was probably 1986, 1987, so it's not that long ago. And I think, although these barriers are there, we can change that. It's just, I think it's really important to remember that we have to think about how we do if we want to stand up and be part of the broader leadership team. The other thing is, I may be naive, I did not realise Mother Teresa was a nurse, but she was. It makes sense. She had the Little Sisters of the Poor. But the public image of us is that they trust us, we know that. Trusted profession. We're devoted and we would work for no money. We're humble. We're nearly always female. We're not ambitious. We want to stay with patients the whole time. And, you know, we would never want to be a manager and be doing those things that actually required in management to lead a team. For me, I need to say this before I forget to say it, one of the most important parts of my role is I am here to make sure that the people who are delivering the care can provide the best care they can. And to me that is as important as being a one-on-one, making a difference to one person. But we don't celebrate that. It's probably not seen in the hierarchy of altruism as at the highest order, but we need to think about that. Even worse is the media image, and this is where I think we're influenced personally. So there's a range of things, but we're seen as being naughty. There's not a joke that hasn't gone by any of us that are in nursing about the naughty nurse joke, or sometimes nasty, the one that's going to give you the injection. Pretty tough if you think of some of the people that have been involved, female, or if you're a man, gay. A doctor's assistant. I was going to show you a video, and the students were asking people what they thought, and the number of people that said, oh, don't they do the things doctors don't want to do? Or they're the doctor's assistant, or want to be doctors. Weren't you good enough to be a doctor? If anybody's seen Meet the Fockers, you would know that they say, don't you want to be a doctor? You're always seen as the romantic interest in some, amazing romantic story. But we are seen as capable. We're seen as competent and capable, which is positive. But I have to say, if you just think about it, how many of these things do you think, did you grow up with yourself? So you're trying to fight that battle all the time yourself, as much as the public. The way we value ourselves is around we are being very technically competent, we're fantastic at our job, we can run in and save the day. Somebody needs to set up for something, we can get it done. Or we can care for people in a way that makes them feel valued. That's fabulous. We also get a lot of value about our heart and how we feel proud to be a nurse. I'm incredibly proud to be a nurse, but I do think it pervades every part of us. And we don't want to give up that title, I'd have to say. And we also love the idea that we are saving lives, work really hard, did a really hard night duty, oh, nobody works as hard as us. We love all that, in some ways, on some level. You can argue with me in a minute if you want. The other thing about this is we do undervalue men in our workforce. As I said, men make up 9% of our workforce, and that lack of diversity holds us back in leadership roles. Men bring to the table a whole range of things, besides the fact they reflect our population, so we should have 50% of our workforce as men. But men, by their very nature and their different gender, will bring to it a confidence about stepping up into senior roles. Hence, we have about 23% men in senior roles. They will also not tolerate things like wage differences. They also are able to have a male-on-male conversation in a way that sometimes females can't. All those things lift up the profession and will offer more leaders. And so I think there's a really valuable part about actually men in nursing. Just to give you a sense of what the NHS looks like, though, this is our recent report, 2016. We actually aren't doing well. We are doing well, I should say. Sorry, NHS. 77% of the workforce are women, and as you can see, that's much higher than the normal population. And I was really impressed to see that 46% of chief executives and directors in the NHS are women. That doesn't mean they're necessarily clinicians. They could be the HR director, they could be CEO from a different ilk. That's fine, it's fantastic, but it actually is much better than I thought it was. The other element in that sits around, this was particularly in relation to medicine, and you can see that as generally medicine in training is about the same as men, but we know as you get into more senior roles, and I'll show you this, you can see it starts to change. So this is a reflection of age, but if you take age as a reflection of seniority, it's not, I understand it not always is, but you can see that when you get to the 16 to 24-year-olds and the 25 to 29s, I think band 5s and 6s, I guess, in our world, you can see it changes over age. I don't think any of us want to be working at 65 plus, do we? I did once have an 83-year-old nurse that worked for me. Not for long, by the way. So I think there's just an interesting aspect to that, and it's reflected in a whole range of ways. The benefits of us having gender equality will be around improving our overall organisational performance. We all bring something different to the table. And as I said, we need to access our widest talent pool. We do have legislative requirements that you could argue that we need to follow in the public sector around gender, and we also want to be seen as an exemplary employer. If there are not opportunities for nursing allied health clinicians to step up into the organisation and read by default women, that though it's not necessarily always the case, then they will leave. So we have to find a way to create opportunities for people to learn and to be able to feel confident enough to take on leadership roles. I had to talk about one impressive nurse that we have in the system. This person is not here, in the Netherlands, and our friends in Europe, or Scandinavia, is it? Both. Jos de Blok is a community health nurse. And he, a few years ago now, decided with 4 other nurses that he would create his own organisation. He created a community health organisation that was self-managed teams of nurses and would lead it. So he now has 9,000 employees, all self-managing in a way that we would be calling in the organisation reinventing organisations. He's totally changed it and is quoted quite often in some of that work. As it happened, Roy Lilly yesterday mentioned him, so I thought I'd better mention it, that he actually was talking about an organisation being run by an inspiring chief executive. And he represented for me an example of a person who has a clinical background, could change an organisation based on the way clinicians want to work. And if any of us are aspiring to be in those very senior roles, then that is actually ultimately what we want to do. I like the fact that Nurse Lilly said, Nurse Lilly, he'd love that, wouldn't he? Roy Lilly said, nurses are perfectly capable of taking on joint responsibility. What I didn't see was nurses are perfectly capable of leading. So that was interesting. But it is joint responsibility. I wanted to reflect what our nurse leaders do. So if you're a band 7 in our organisation, so that's a sister for those people that don't look at it, you might have, in our context, 50 staff that you're looking after. You might have about £1 million budget that you're managing or accountable for. You may have, on a 28-bed ward, you might have about 1,000 patients a year and about 5,000 interactions with a family member, a friend, whatever. And you're probably having, on the work that I'd done in Western Australia, about 24 interactions a day with another discipline. You know, you're leading a team, you're running a business. That is actually a business leader. But we don't talk about it in that context and then allow people to succeed beyond that because they have been successful in that. And I really think there's something about changing the language to recognise that's fantastic. If you are a strong capable business person who understands how to manage your staffing, how to manage your budget and provide great clinical outcomes. That is what we would intend you to do and prepare you for strong leadership roles. Oh, didn't realise there was a little... Someone's been playing with the slides at my end. So what do we need to get better at? I think we need to get better at understanding hospital finances, and I reflected it earlier. You know, it's almost a dirty word, but in fact we are custodians of the public purse. And it is important that we understand finances if we want to have a conversation with authority and with confidence with our finance directors, our HR directors, whoever it is. And that takes some learning, it takes some education. We are self-sufficient decision makers. We make decisions on the run all the time. But we have to learn to take various points of view. And I'd have to say in a board that's really important. Even when you don't like it, you have to actually accept that there will be other points of view as valid, that you are aimed with a different perspective. Nurse education is evolving, but I think it's worth thinking about getting education that gives you confidence in if you want to be a leadership role. Yes, it's really important, and particularly with Dixon sitting in the room, for our magnet accreditation. It is also that we have a foundation of nursing qualification. It's also really important if you're in an executive or a senior leadership role that you get the relevant education to be able to talk to the right people in the right way to get decisions made. And I think one of the other things is you need to think about offering broad perspectives. So not just the nursing voice. How do you offer a perspective on something else from your past, from your skill set in the boardroom? Because one of the things we run the risk of is only talking narrowly on nursing and people are switching off, for want of a better term. If we can provide a broad view and then bring into the frame the nursing perspective in a strong way, it is taken more seriously, I think, generally. This is my perception now, not necessarily. We also need to get that balanced perspective of professional and organisational need. And we need to use our, as mentioned, our professional knowledge, but give it balance with a bit of broader perspective. Oh, did that go backwards? So, this is the classic. For those of you, most people will know what this is. I think this is the fundamental of being a nursing leader and having to be at a board level and executive level and having to make the tough decisions. And when we can discuss this openly and we can accept that we have to make some difficult choices, I think it's important. So for those of you, this bedboard is not at our hospital, it's actually Harder England, I think, stolen off Google. And, but you can see that their actual shifts, they've got one nurse short each shift. At a ward level, it's going to be the decision about whether you put a nursing assistant on and can you live with the consequences of that. At a more senior level, it might be this has been running for 3 days, for 2 weeks, and how long, much longer is it safe? At a board level, it is going to be the decision where somebody says to you, okay, do you think we should put in more nursing assistants and have less nurses? Or is there another health professional that can do some of this work? Or should we shut beds? How are we balancing safe staffing around this? And I think that this example is the tension that we have all the time of the professional need and recognising the organisation. And I think we need to learn how to speak that in a way. So we might say patients are unsafe. We might mean we are missing out. If we are actually, if we don't have that number of staff, key things will be missed, i.e. antibiotics will be late, pressure management might be late, documentation or discharges might be late. We tend to say they won't get their care. We need to be very careful about how we express it so that it's understood by people what the consequences are, and that helps the decision making. And I think that's something we're learning. I mentioned about if you're going to progress, I've used the word boards in the broadest term because that's probably where the most senior roles are. There's something about getting education, as I mentioned. The best CEOs I've seen have got great work-life balance. Not sure everyone that works to them do. See a few nods. But the best CEOs, because they're resilient, have actually got work-life balance. And as much as it's hard to do, it's important that we encourage it for each other and we encourage it for the people that work for us. I mentioned about building a diverse portfolio. I think it creates credibility. So I'll give you an example. We have our Deputy Chief Nurse has a medical anthropology degree, Masters, you probably didn't know that. But it does offer a slight change in perspective because of that qualification. As it happens, I have a Masters in Architecture and Construction, which is kind of, nobody would think that would be the kind of qualification I would choose. I didn't choose it to be a chief nurse. I chose it because I was on a project. But the side effect of that means that now in this current role, I can have a broader conversation with confidence and with credibility on something that people do not expect. But sharing your stories is also really important, being true to who you are. For those of you that know me well, I'm quite loud, I laugh a lot, I giggle, I make bad jokes and occasionally swear. That's the one I try to stop, but in fact I have to be true to who I am. The time that I actually failed the most, when I was effectively marched discreetly from a job, which I can talk about at another time, was when I was not true to myself, when I tried to be the person that I thought you needed to be in an executive role. And although there is a different perspective and certainly a different style in England to Australia, it's really important that you're true to who you are, I think, because you can't maintain it. That's the trouble. And I think one of the advantages we have is we manage teams early. From about 26 years of age, we're all managing teams, and whether it's a shift coordinator or as a sister or a deputy sister on a ward, and that helps. Learning to lead medical colleagues is probably the hardest part, I think, for non-medical staff. Having to have that first difficult conversation with the professor who is here on the ward in the evening when you need to have a difficult conversation about inappropriate end-of-life care, or it might be about walking onto the ward late at night, or whatever it is, or a discharge planning, or how their registrars are behaving. That very first interaction, when you learn how to have that debate with medical staff, follows you into the boardroom. And I think it's really important to do that early, but once you are in the boardroom, to be able to understand that role will mean leading medical colleagues. And that's because of our history of being acquiescing on occasions. I always say, we say to the doctor, I grew up with the term where you didn't say to a doctor, excuse me, you've got the medication wrong. You said, oh, Mr. So-and-so, do you think you might have got that medication? That doesn't look quite right. We didn't say, excuse me, in my professional opinion, I think this is the wrong medication. And I really hope the next generation of nurses do not do that, but there is a lesson for us to learn how to do it. Translating strategy into how it affects the clinical teams is really important for credibility with your own teams if you're a leader. Some of the supporting skills are around technical competence, and it helps to have that. The conceptual skills are really important, I think, for nursing staff, but also for trying to understand complex environments and organisations, and we do bring that. Interpersonal skills are really vital, and I think the confidence to speak with authority, not to be rude, not to feel like a victim, all of those things take practice. I really think we need to create a safe space in which people can test those things, like mock trust boards or having environments where people get to shadow so that they can actually test out those skill sets. Getting experience, if you're going to get experience for an executive role, if you've got an idea, if you see somewhere in your future you'd like to do something in a senior leadership role, I would suggest you find something you're passionate about. All of our non-executive directors are passionate about health. There's no doubt about it. They have different interests, but they're there because they're passionate about health. Find something you're interested in and do that. Start small. I'm suggesting you have a voluntary role. At school, something like that, practice, so that when it affects your career, you have had some practice in some of those roles. Get education on being a board member. I've done the company directors course and I learned more in that probably than I learned in a lot of things about how to behave in a board. Don't always get it right though. And shadow some people that you think exemplify what you want to be. Oh, another one that I didn't know about. The other thing that's really important, and you see this at divisional executives, you see it in your teams, you will see it with a consultant on a ward, is the interpersonal dynamics. If you can be aware of that, everybody walks into a room, a senior team room, with their own perspective. I often forget that there are people having a debate between themselves or having their own power struggles between each of them in the room, and trying to understand that really helps you because you know what you need to do, and finding out what motivates people in your team, your executive team or your board. I think adding a value, the value that we add as clinicians is partly about that clinical interface. But there'll be a value add because of your personal circumstances, because of your life. You've been a patient, you've been a volunteer somewhere, you come from another country. All of those things add value to the discussion, and if you can get the confidence to bring those into the fold, that you will add value. I also think one of the difficult things we struggle with is about how you deal with resistance and the power gap, that inherent power gap that exists because of the history of professions. Florence Nightingale, despite everything she did, had to report to a doctor. She was not the head of her hospital, the doctor was. And we fight we have to think about how we manage that gap all the time. Oh, backwards. Sorry, folks. Lastly, this is my tips about what I do. So now you're all going to be watching me when you see me at a trust board meeting or in any kind of event. But I am absolutely vigilant about not acquiescing just for the sake of it and being passive. I do it on occasion. I know I do. I don't get it right every time, where I don't speak up when I feel strongly about something because I'll either embarrass myself or I'm not used to speaking in front of a largely male trust board. I do. But I try to be vigilant about it. I have to be really careful about that external out-to-dinner behaviour because I am a bit, I guess I will say everything. I'm open about my life. And as a result of that, that can come back to haunt you in these senior executive roles. And I would say you need to also think about it, the ward dinner, when you're the sister, the matron. It will come back to haunt you. And I have some stories I will never tell publicly that I regret. But I think you need to think about that because it influences how people perceive you in the future. The other thing is that I haven't mentioned here, but if you have grown up in an organisation and you've been the staff nurse and you want to be the chief nurse, you sometimes have to go out of the organisation and come back in because people see you as that staff nurse and you have to work out how to do it and when to do it. I have to be really vigilant also about not slouching. So, does anybody know the cat-dog story in a boardroom? The theory is, in every boardroom there's a cat and a dog, so watch it next time. There is the dog, and I would say, I'm generalising, that sometimes we are dogs. That is, love me, love me, love me, look at me, look at me, look at me, I'm so good, I'm precious, you know, be my friend. And so that's the person who leans forward in the table and wants to talk. Then there is the person who's the cat that says, come on, show me how much you love me. And that is sometimes our medical colleagues. I love them to death, but that is how it is. And you see them sit back. So don't lean forward when you have a point to say, but sit back when you want to demonstrate that you're listening to somebody and they have to influence you. I'll be watching it next time in the meeting. I've forgotten about it, but it's good fun. Make eye contact. It's very difficult for people not to engage with you and to listen to your voice and what you have to say when you make eye contact, and that's sometimes hard. I've had to learn to smile instead of giggle. So my nervous thing is to giggle. And I've had to try really hard just to smile. Sometimes things are funny and I do giggle, but I would suggest just watch your body dynamics around how you do this. It is quite a nursing type behaviour to take on that. It was quite, I hope it was cute at 25 when I giggled when somebody spoke to me, but it's certainly not attractive as a 50-year-old. And so you have to change your behaviour over time. And the other thing that's really important is to try and provide, and this is a really hard thing to do, detailed but concise responses when you are in meetings. So we do tend to go around the houses a few times and then we say the point. If you can provide detailed responses but they're concise, you'll win friends. I do that by writing the points down. I don't trust myself, if I'm honest, to not ramble a bit. So I write the point down that I want to get clear so that I can be as concise as I possibly can. Lots of people do it, and you see it happening a lot in a boardroom, particularly when it's public. But that's just a tip. I've mentioned about learning to speak forward of your portfolio and leaning back in the chair when you want to. The other thing that is really important is to respect the conventions of the room that you're in. There are certain conventions that exist when you're in a boardroom, certain conventions on a ward, and although I rail against them, so at the moment I'm railing against the Oxford comma because I didn't know it existed. So, so I'm determined not to use it because it seems ridiculous to me. But that doesn't mean that everybody else in Oxford University isn't going to continue to use it, so it's kind of pointless. Change the conventions if you think they undermine the integrity of the team that you work with, the board that you're on, or the decisions that you need to make, but otherwise be respectful of them, because those people, they've been socialised within that team and you may actually find it more difficult to get decisions if you don't. So in summary, besides being absolutely delighted to have had over 30 years as a nurse and to lead a fantastic team of nurses at the Oxford University Hospital's FoundationTrust, I wanted to comment that I think that healthcare professionals of all disciplines have a huge range of skills that are suitable for senior leadership. We've got some barriers, that's fine, I think every discipline does. Sometimes it's from the public, sometimes it's from the organisation, and sometimes we self-impose them. They're the ones we can control so we can change. But there's many ways of building skills and confidence, and there's plenty of opportunities for outstanding healthcare leadership if you're looking for it. And I think that nurses, allied health, medical clinicians, all of us have a role to play in senior leadership in the NHS. So thank you.